September 11, 2011 became the black day for the history of America, which changed the American history forever. On that day, there was a terrorist attack on many big cities of America such as New York, Washington, D.C., Shanksville, and Pennsylvania. Due to which nearly 3,000 people lost their lives. There were many attacks one after the other on that day. No one knew when and where the next attack would happen. All the attacks were so big that in a few hours, many large buildings in the United States were destroyed and the entire United States suffered from the threat of attacks. The atmosphere became so gloomy and critical that the American President George W. were airbound for. He was airbound for the president's safety on the advice of the Pentagon and CIA. No place on American soil was peaceful that day. They were running towards these places in search of relatives. Neither the government nor the media was aware of it. Who will be the victim of the next attack? Even though 3 airplanes hit the World Trade Center and the Pentagon one after the other, the American government stopped all flights, and after 3 attacks there was no attack. Actually, the terrorists hijacked 4 airplanes, but the 4th one was destroyed before it could destroy any place. The 4th attack is credited for saving America to the passengers who risked their lives to stop the hijackers. He did not give up and bravely faced them in a moving plane, which caused the plane to crash in a field in Pennsylvania before reaching its destination. After Atticus, on the one hand, the United States was engaged in self-isolation. On the other hand, the needle of suspicion of the American government began to move around. American agencies immediately started to focus on countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, and Sudan. Saddam Hussein was also suspected by America. But then soon Al-Qaeda took responsibility for these blasts. Meanwhile, Al-Qaeda was led by Osama Bin Laden. The FBI and CIA began a search operation to find Laden. The clocks of death started counting. Who was this Osama Bin Laden for whom America was so crazy that it was determined to find him? In today's video, we will look at the life of Osama Bin Laden. Early life and education. He was born on March 10, 1957, in the Saudi city of Riyadh. According to a 1998 interview with Al Jazeera, Bin Laden stated that his birth date was March 10, 1957, though it is widely believed that he was born in Saudi Arabia's capital, Jeddah. His father was a multi-billionaire construction magnate, with close connections to Saudi Arabia's royal family. His 10th wife was a Syrian national, Hamida Al-Attash, then known as Alia Ghanem. Hamida and her husband, Mohammed bin Laden, divorced Hamida shortly after the birth of Osama bin Laden. Hamida was recommended to an associate of Mohammed bin Laden, and in the late 1960s or early 1970s, Mohammed bin Laden married Hamida. The couple raised 4 children in their new household, including Osama's 3 half-brothers and 1 half-sister. The family's fortune was $5 billion, of which he inherited approximately $25 to $30 million. Bin Laden grew up in Jeddah as a Sunni Muslim. From 1968 to 1976 he attended the high-end Al-Fajr Model School. He went on to study economics and business administration at King Abdullah University in Jeddah. According to some sources, Bin Laden obtained a civil engineering degree in 1979 or a public administration degree in 1981. In 1971, he attended an English language course at Oxford, England. One source describes him as hardworking, and another states that he dropped out of university in his 3rd year without having completed a college degree. During his university years, Bin Laden's primary interest was religion, which he focused on interpreting the Quran and jihad, as well as charitable work. He also wrote poetry, read, and liked to play association football at center forward and was a fan of the English soccer team Arsenal. Bin Laden was also a student of the influential Islamic revolutionary thinker Abdullah Yusuf al-Azam and read his many books. He was also heavily influenced by the ideas of the Muslim Brotherhood leaders. Personal life. Bin Laden married his first wife, a 17-year-old woman named Najwa Ghanem, at Latakia in Syria in 1974. However, they were later divorced and Ghanem left Afghanistan on September 9, 2001, 2 days before the September 11th attacks. He then married Khadija Sharif in 1983 and divorced her in the 1990s. He then married another woman, a woman named Khairia Sabar, in 1985 and divorced her in 1987. He then married a sixth woman, a woman whose name is unknown, shortly after the wedding. He fathered 20 to 26 children with his wife. Many of his children have fled to Iran after the attacks on September 11, 2001, and Iranian authorities have reportedly continued to monitor their travel to and from Iran. In his memoir, Nasser al-Bari describes his father as a frugal man and strict father who took his family on shooting trips and picnics in the desert. His father-in-law, Mohammed bin Laden, died in 1967 when an American pilot, Jim Harrington, misjudged the landing of a plane in Saudi Arabia. As an adult, bin Laden was described by the FBI as tall and thin, with an olive complexion and a left-handed walker, weighing approximately 73 kilograms. His preferred style of clothing was a plain white keffiyeh, although he had dropped the traditional Saudi keffiyeh and was now wearing the traditional Yemeni keffiyeh. He was soft-spoken and had a mild-mannered demeanor. Bin Laden's oldest half-brother Salem bin Laden, who would later become the head of the bin Laden family, died in a plane crash near San Antonio, Texas, United States, in 1988. The plane crashed into power lines, killing all on board. According to the Pulitzer Prize-winning author Lawrence Wright, many of bin Laden's closest friends confirmed that rumors of his height were exaggerated and that he was actually just over 6 feet tall, 1.8 meters. After his death, the FBI measured bin Laden at approximately 1.93 meters, 6 feet 4 inches. Political views. According to Michael Scheuer, a former CIA analyst who led the agency's hunt for bin Laden, al-Qaeda's leader, was motivated by a perception that the United States' foreign policy had caused oppression, death, or injury to Muslims throughout the Middle East, so the threat to U.S. national security did not stem from what al-Qaeda did, but rather what the United States did, or as Scheuer puts it, they hate us Americans, for our actions, not for who we are. In a late 2002 letter, bin Laden blasted the United States for its secular form of governance, and called on Americans to convert to Islam and reject the morale and genetic makeup of the United States. He argued that the Muslim world was in dire straits and that the only way out of it was to restore Sharia law, which he said was the only way to put an end to all the wickedness of the past. Bin Laden opposed pan-Arabist, socialist, communist, and democratic alternatives to Sharia law as well as the use of intoxic. The combination of these ideas, along with violent jihad, has sometimes been referred to as Qutbism, a term derived from the work of the 19th century Islamic thinker Sayyid Omar. Bin Laden held that Afghanistan under Mullah Omar's Taliban was the only Islamic country in the Muslim world, and that violent jihad was necessary to correct what he saw as injustices against Muslims by the United States, and sometimes by non-Muslims. In his 2002 letter to the American people, bin Laden called the establishment of an Israeli state a crime which must be erased, and called for the United States to withdraw all of its civilian and military forces from the Arabian Peninsula and all Muslim countries. Bin Laden's views and methods of implementation led to him being labeled a terrorist by academics, journalists at the New York Times, the BBC, and Qatari news channel Al Jazeera, as well as analysts like Peter Bergen, Michael Scheuer, Mark Sageman, and Bruce Hoffman. Law enforcement agencies in Madrid, New York, and Tripoli indicted him on terrorism charges. Bin Laden called for targeting American civilians in response to U.S. attacks on Muslims. He claimed that this policy would discourage the U.S. military from targeting Muslims. He also claimed that all Americans, because most of them voted for him and paid taxes to the U.S. military, were complicit in his government's crimes. In my view, said Noah Feldman, because the U.S. is a democracy, every American is responsible for its government's actions and civilians are fair targets. In an interview with a Pakistani journalist, Hamid Mir, 2 months after the attacks on September 11, 2001, bin Laden said, "I believe that if an enemy occupies an Islamic country and uses its citizens as human shields, then a man has the right to strike at the enemy." The targets of September 11 weren't women and children, but the main targets were the symbols of the United States. Our Prophet Muhammad said, "When I saw the body of an unarmed non-Muslim woman in a war, I asked what the reason was for killing her. If a child is 13 years old or older and carries a weapon against Muslims, it is permissible to kill them." Bin Laden's overall plan for success against much larger adversaries like the Soviet Union and the United States was to draw them into a prolonged war of attrition in the Muslim countries, which would draw in large numbers of jihadis who would never give up. He believed that this would lead to the economic destruction of the enemy countries by bleeding them dry. This is what Al-Qaeda's manuals say. In a 2004 Al Jazeera tape, Bin Laden talked about bleeding America to the point of bankruptcy. Bin Laden has been accused of making numerous mistakes and contradictions in his arguments. He cited democracy as an example of how the Western political system was the law of the very rich and wealthy, and as the reason why civilians should be held accountable for their government's actions and thus be punished by death. Bin Laden described democracy as a false religion of ignorance that violates Islam by imposing man-made rules. However, in a later interview, Bin Laden compared the democracy of Spain to the democracy of the Muslim world, where the ruler is held accountable. According to Rodenbeck, Bin Laden has never heard any theological justification for democracy, which is based on the idea that an all-powerful God must have the will of all the people. He was also a strong anti-Semite, claiming that most of what happened around the world was the result of Jewish actions. In an interview with a Pakistani journalist in December 1998, Bin Laden said that Operation Desert Fox was proof that Jewish forces controlled American and British governments and told them to kill as many Muslims as possible. In a letter published at the end of 2002, Bin Laden claimed that Jews controlled the civilian media, politics, and economic institutions in the United States. In an interview with ABC's John Miller in 1998, Bin Laden said that the goal of the State of Israel is to take over the Arabian Peninsula, the Middle East, and to enslave all the peoples of the world, as part of a greater Israel. He also said that Muslims and Jews will never get along, and that war between the two peoples is inevitable. He accused the United States of instigating anti-Islamic sentiments. He also said that the United States State Department and United States Department of Defense are controlled by the Jews, with the sole aim of serving the State of Israel. He often warned of alleged Jewish plots, saying, "These Jews are lords of usury, and leaders of treachery, and they will not leave you anything either now or in the future." In Bin Laden's Al-Qaeda organization, Shia Muslims were listed as the four main enemies of Islam alongside heretics, as well as the United States, the United Nations, and the United Kingdom. Bin Laden had mixed views on technology, including Earth. Bin Laden did not receive direct U.S. funding or training in the 1980s, nor did his supporters. He believed climate change was a threat and wrote a letter calling on Americans to join forces with President Barack Obama in a calmer decision to save humanity from the poisonous gases that threaten its fate. Bin Laden's military and political career. After graduating from college in 1979, he moved to Pakistan, where he became a member of Abdullah Azzam's Al-Qaeda affiliate. He used money and equipment from his construction company to aid the Mujahideen resistance in the Afghanistan-Soviet War. Bin Laden later told a journalist, "I felt outraged that injustice was done to the people of Afghanistan." The U.S., as part of the CIA's operations in Afghanistan, Operation Cyclone, and Saudi Arabia and China provided tens of thousands of Mujahideen fighters with financial aid and weapons through Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence (IS) between 1979 and 1992. Some of them bled to Arabs fighting the Soviets, but not many. Bin Laden and Hamid Gul had a long-standing relationship, beginning in the early 1980s, when he worked as a salaried Saudi GIP agent for Hamid Gul, three-star general of the Pakistani army, and the head of the Pakistani intelligence agency, ISL. The US provided money and weapons to the militant groups, but the training of them was done entirely by the Pakistan Armed Forces, PAF, and the Pakistani Inter-Services Intelligence, ISI. It was Pakistan's policy at the time not to involve the Americans in distribution of funds, weapons, or training of the Mujahideen. And the Americans stayed in Islamabad at the embassy and never went into Afghanistan or met with the leaders of the Afghan resistance, notes Steve Call. There is no record of CIA contact with Bin Laden in CIA archives. Bin Laden's first trainer was a U.S. Special Forces commando, Ali Mohammed. By 1984, he and Azam set up Maktab al-Khidmat, a network that funneled money, weapons, and fighters from all over the Arab world to Afghanistan. Bin Laden's family fortune was used to pay for air tickets, accommodation, paperwork with Pakistani authorities, and other services for jihadi fighters. He also set up camps inside Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province and trained volunteers from all over the Muslim world to confront the Soviet-backed government in Afghanistan. From 1986 to 1987, Bin Laden established a base in Afghanistan's eastern region for a few dozen of his Arab soldiers. From there, he participated in some fighting against the Soviets, including the Battle of Jaji, which was lionized by the mainstream Arab press despite its lack of strategic importance. It was during this period that Bin Laden came to be seen as an idol by many Arabs. In May 1988, in response to rumors that Shias had massacred thousands of Sunnis in and around the Pakistani city of Gilgit, a large number of Shias were killed. Shia civilians were also raped. The massacre was said to have been a response to a Shia rebellion in Gilgit against the rule of the military dictator, Zia-ul-Haq. The Pakistan Army forced Osama bin Laden to lead a force of armed Sunni tribesmen from Afghanistan and frontier province northwest to Gilgit and the surrounding areas to quell the rebellion, Rahman wrote. The formation and structure of Al-Qaeda. In 1988, bin Laden had broken away from the Al-Qaeda organization Maktab al-Qaeda. Azam had been providing support to Afghan fighters, but bin Laden wanted more of a military role. According to Rahman's notes of a meeting with bin Laden and other leaders on August 20, 1988, Al-Qaeda had become a formal group. The goal of the organization was to lift the word of God, so that his religion may triumph. The requirements for membership included, but were not limited to, being able to listen well, having good manners, being obedient, and having a pledge to obey one's superiors. Wright notes that the group's real name was kept a secret because it was still a secret. According to Wright's research, the formation of Al-Qaeda took place at a meeting on August 11, 1988, between several senior Egyptian Islamic Jihad leaders and bin Laden. The leaders agreed to use bin Laden's money to join the expertise of Islamic Jihad and to take up the cause of jihad elsewhere after the Soviet Union pulled out of Afghanistan. Bin Laden then worked for his family's business before returning to Saudi Arabia. After the Soviet Union pulled its troops out of Afghanistan in 1989, bin Laden and his Arab allies were credited with bringing down the superpower. Bin Laden offered to send Al-Qaeda to depose the Soviet-backed Yemeni Socialist Party government in South Yemen, but Prince Turki bin Faisal rejected his offer. He then attempted to sabotage the unification process in Yemen by killing YSP leaders, but was stopped by the Saudi Interior Minister, Prince Naif al-Din al-Abdulaziz, following complaints from the Yemeni president. He was also displeased with the intertribal fighting in Afghanistan. Nevertheless, he continued to cooperate with the Saudi General Intelligence Directorate, GID, and the Pakistani Inter-Services Intelligence, ISI. In March 1989, bin Laden led 8,000 Arab foreign fighters in the battle for Jalalabad, which was unsuccessful. Bin Laden then led his men personally to encircle the 7th SA Randowi Regiment, but failed to do so, resulting in heavy losses. He financed a 1990 attempt at a coup d'état in Afghanistan led by the hardline communist Gen. Shah Nawaz Tanai, as well as lobbying the Pakistan Parliament to launch an unsuccessful no-confidence motion against Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. The invasion of Kuwait by Saddam Hussein on August 2, 1990, posed a threat to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and its royal family. With his forces on the kingdom's border, Saddam was able to whip up internal discontent. Within a week of King Fahd agreeing to U.S. Defense Secretary Dick Cheney's offer of American military support, bin Laden had a meeting with King Abdullah and Saudi Defense Minister Sheikh Sultan bin Abdullah. Bin Laden told them that they should not rely on non-Muslim help from the U.S. and others, and offered to help protect them with his Arab Legion. When Sultan asked him how he would defend the fighters in case Saddam used chemical and biological weapons on them, Bin Laden said, "We will fight him with our faith." Bin Laden's offer was rejected, and the King of Saudi Arabia called for the deployment of U.S. troops on Saudi soil. In public, Bin Laden denounced Saudi reliance on the U.S. forces and declared that the Quran prohibits non-Muslims from entering the Arabian Peninsula, and that the two holy cities of Mecca and Medina, which Muhammad visited and recited Allah's message, should be defended only by Muslims. He also urged senior clerics to issue fatwas condemning the U.S. military deployment, but they refused to do so out of fear of reprisals. As Bin Laden continued to criticize the Saudi monarchy, he was placed under house arrest, where he remained until 1991, when he was forced to leave Saudi Arabia by the Saudi government after continuing to criticize the Saudi-US alliance. On November 8, 1990, the U.S. 82nd Airborne Division landed in the northeastern Saudi town of Dhahran, located barely 400 miles from the city of Medina. The following day, on November 9, 1990, the FBI conducted a raid on the New Jersey home belonging to Al-Qaeda associate Ali Mohammed. The FBI uncovered numerous plots to blow up skyscrapers in New York City. This was the first time the FBI uncovered Al-Qaeda terrorist plots outside of Muslim nations. Nasser was convicted in 1993 of the bombing of the World Trade Center and later admitted his guilt for the bombing of the New York City Rabbi Meir Kahane on November 5, 1990. After leaving Saudi Arabia in 1991, Bin Laden and his followers moved initially to Afghanistan, before relocating to Sudan in 1992 in a deal facilitated by Ali Mohammed. Bin Laden had a personal security team made up of bodyguards chosen by him. They carried SA-7s, Stinger rockets, an AK-47, RPGs and a PK machine gun. Bin Laden tried to mediate in Afghanistan's escalating civil war between March and April 1992. He encouraged warlords to join forces with other Mujahideen leaders to negotiate a coalition government rather than try to take Kabul on his own. U.S. intelligence followed Bin Laden's activities in Sudan by running operatives by his compound daily and taking photos of his activities. They also monitored him by setting up a safe house in Sudan and using signals intelligence to monitor him and record his movements. In Sudan, Bin Laden purchased a house in the affluent quarter of Al-Mishtal Street and a retreat in the Blue Nile town of Soba. He invested heavily in infrastructure, agriculture and businesses while working as a Sudan agent for hunting surveys. He constructed roads with bulldozers using the same equipment he had used to clear mountains in Afghanistan. Many of his workers were former comrades in the anti-Soviet war. He was generous with the poor and popular among the population. He continued to rail against King Fahd in 1994, when Fahd revoked Bin Laden's Saudi citizenship and forced his family to cut his $7 million annual stipend. Bin Laden was linked to Egyptian Islamic Jihad, which formed the core of Al-Qaeda. In 1995, EIJ tried to kill Egypt's President Hosni Mubarak, but the attempt failed and Sudan expelled EIJ. The U.S. State Department charged Sudan with sponsoring international terrorism, and Bin Laden was accused of running terrorist training camps in Sudan's desert. Sudanese officials said that this stance became outdated as the country's top Islamist political leader, Hassan al-Turabi, lost control. Sudanese leaders wanted to work with the U.S., but U.S. officials refused to meet them, even after Bin Laden was expelled. It wasn't until 2000 that U.S. intelligence officials were authorized to visit Sudan. The 9/11 Commission report states, according to the 9/11 Commission report, at the end of 1995, Bin Laden was still living in Sudan. The State Department and the CIA learned that Sudanese leaders were talking to the Saudi government about expelling Bin Laden, and U.S. Ambassador Timothy Carney urged the Sudanese to do so. The Sudanese wanted Bin Laden out, but the Saudis didn't want him out, citing the revocation of his citizenship as the reason. Sudanese Minister of Defense Fadi Irwa said that Sudan offered to deliver Bin Laden to the United States, but the commission found no evidence that this was the case. Ambassador Carney's instructions were to encourage Sudan to expel Bin Laden. But there was no legal basis to request more from Sudan because there was no indictment in any country against bin Laden at the time. Sudanese officials began to contact officials from the US and other governments in February 1996, asking what steps they could take to reduce foreign pressure on Sudan. In private meetings, Sudan offered bin Laden to be expelled to Saudi Arabia, and asked for his pardon. US officials learned of these secret talks in March. Saudi officials wanted bin Laden out of Sudan, but they had revoked his citizenship and would not allow him to remain in Sudan. Perhaps bin Laden no longer felt secure in Sudan, as he had already survived an assassination attempt, which he believed was the work of an Egyptian or Saudi regime, and financed by the CIA, in 1996. Bin Laden was allowed to leave Sudan and travel to any country of his choosing. On May 18, 1996, he took a charter flight from Khartoum, Sudan, to return to Afghanistan, where he formed a strong bond with Mullah Muhammad Omar. Bin Laden's expulsion from Sudan severely weakened him and his organization. According to some African intelligence sources, bin Laden's expulsion left him with no choice but to become a full-blown radical, and most of the 300 or so Afghans who left with him later turned into terrorists. Some sources say that bin Laden lost as much as $20 million to $300 million in Sudan. His construction equipment was confiscated by the government, and he was forced to close down his businesses, land, and even his horse. 1996 Declaration of War and 1998 Fatwa. On August 26, 1996, bin Laden delivered a fatwa titled Declaration of War against the Americans occupying the land of the two holy places, which was published by the London-based newspaper Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP. Saudi Arabia is sometimes referred to as the land of the two holy mosques, referring to the two holiest sites in Islam, Mecca and Medina. The mention of occupation in the fatwa referred to U.S. forces operating in Saudi Arabia to control airspace in Iraq, Operation Southern Watch. In 1990, President George H.W. Bush assured King Fahd that all U.S. troops would be withdrawn from Saudi Arabia once the threat from Iraq was resolved. By 1996, the U.S. troops were still there, as Bush cited the need to deal with the remnants of Saddam's regime, which he chose not to eliminate. In bin Laden's view, America's attempts to dominate the Middle East and its support of Israel were the products of the region. Saudi Arabia, he said, has become an American colony. In the fatwa, bin Laden attacked America's support of Israel and its sanctions against Iraq. Terrorizing you, even if you are carrying weapons on our soil, is a legal and moral obligation. This right is known to all men and other creatures. Our youth are not like your soldiers, and your problem will not be how to persuade your soldiers to fight, but how to control our youth. The young people hold you responsible for the killing and expulsion of the Muslims, and for the violation of the holy places by your Zionist brethren in Lebanon. You have openly provided them with weapons and money. Over 600,000 children in Iraq have died due to a lack of food and medicines, and because of the unjust aggression, sanctions, imposed against Iraq and its people. The children in Iraq are our children, and you, the United States, and the Saudi regime are to blame for the shedding of blood of those innocent children. Therefore, whatever contract you have with us is now in vain. On February 23, 1998, bin Laden, along with Ayman al-Zawahiri, al-Sham, and Ahmed Rifai Taha, the leader of al-Quran, together with Sheikh Mir Hamza, the leader of the al-Sharia, issued another fatwa against the United States and its allies. The fatwa was titled Declaration of the International Union for Jihad Against the Jewry and the Crusaders. It listed a number of acts of aggression by the United States of America, including the presence of U.S. forces in the Arabian. All of these American actions and misdeeds are a declaration of war against God and His Messenger, and against the Muslims. Throughout Islamic history, religious scholars have agreed that jihad is an individual obligation when an enemy invades a Muslim nation. This was said by the Imam of Qudama in The Source, the Imam of Al-Kisai in The Marvels, the Al-Qurtubi in Al-Qurtubi, and the Sheikh of Islam in his Chronicles, As for fighting against an enemy, which is the most effective way to protect freedom and religion, we agree that this is an obligation. After faith, there is no greater obligation than fighting against an enemy who is destroying religion and the world. Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda raised funds from donors from the Soviet Jihad and from the Pakistani Inter-Services Intelligence (ISI) to set up more training camps for Mujahideen fighters in Afghanistan. Bin Laden also took control of Ariana Afghan Airlines, which transported Islamic militants, weapons, money, and narcotics through the UAE and Pakistan, as well as providing false identities to members of his terrorist network. Bout, an arms smuggler, helped run the airline and maintain the planes and loaded cargo, according to Michael Scheuer of the CIA's Bin Laden unit. Scheuer said Ariana was used as a terrorist taxi service. Early attacks and aid for attacks. Bin Laden is believed to have carried out his first bombing attack on December 29, 1992, when he blew up a hotel in the port city of Aden, killing 2 people. According to reports, Bin Laden's Al-Qaeda provided financial and sometimes military support to jihadis in Algiers, Egypt, Afghanistan, and elsewhere in the 1990s. On July 16, 1992 or July 17, 1993, a Qatari emissary named Kari Al-Said traveled to Algiers to support the Islamists and encourage war rather than negotiations with the government, according to U.S. intelligence sources. Mamdouh Mahmoud Salim issued a fatwa in which he claimed that killing innocent people near the enemy was justified because any innocent bystander would be rewarded with a Jannah or Jahannam jurisdiction, and Jahannam, hell. They were right. The war killed 150,000 to 200,000 Algerians, and ended with the Islamists surrendering to the government. In January 1996, the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, set up a new task force, known as Alex Station, to monitor and conduct operations against Bin Laden. The task force was led by Michael Scheuer. He was a veteran of the CTC's Islamic extremism branch. Late 1990s attacks. It is believed that Bin Laden financed the Luxor massacre, which killed 62 people on November 17, 1997, and caused outrage among the Egyptian public. By mid-1997, the Northern Alliance was threatening to take Jalalabad, prompting Bin Laden to move his operations from the Najm Jihad compound to the Tarnak farms south of the country. Bin Laden then carried out another successful operation in Mazar-i-Sharif, Afghanistan. Several hundred Afghan Arab fighters were sent with him to help the Taliban take over the city. The Taliban killed between 5,000 and 6,000 Hazaras. In February 1998, Al-Qaeda co-founder Osama Bin Laden signed a fatwa on behalf of the WFJ calling for the death of North Americans and all their allies. The fatwa said it was the individual duty of every Muslim to liberate Al-Aqsa, Jerusalem, and the Grand Mosque, Mecca, from the oppression of North Americans. At the fatwa's public announcement, Bin Laden declared that North Americans were very easy targets and told the assembled journalists that they would soon see the results of their actions. On June 24, 1998, Bin Laden and Zawahiri held their first Al-Qaeda Congress in Pakistan. The following day, August 7, 1998, saw a series of truck bomb attacks on the U.S. embassies in major East African cities, Dar es Salaam in Tanzania and Nairobi in Kenya. Al-Qaeda claimed responsibility for the attacks, which were linked to the Egyptian Islamic Jihad. In response to the embassy attacks, President Clinton ordered cruise missile strikes on targets associated with Bin Laden on August 20, 1998, in Sudan and Afghanistan. In December 1998, the director of the CIA's Counterterrorist Center told President Clinton that Al-Qaeda was planning attacks on the United States, including training people to hijack planes. On July 7, 1999, the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation added Bin Laden to its list of 10 most wanted terrorists. On October 15, 1999, the United Nations designated Al-Qaeda as a terrorist organization by UNSCR 1267. The resolution sought to impose sanctions on people and entities associated with Al-Qaeda, freezing assets and prohibiting travel to the United States. On January 3, 2000, Richard Clarke, an Islamic militant leader, announced a triple attack in Jordan that would have included bombing the Radisson SAS Hotel in Amman, the tourist destination Mount Nebo, the Jordan River site, and the USS Sullivans, as well as an attack on an American target inside the United States. The plan was blown apart when a Jordanian terrorist cell was arrested, an exploded skiff targeted the destroyer was sunk, and Ahmed Arias Sam was arrested. Yugoslav Wars. In October 2001, a former U.S. State Department official called Bosnia a safe haven for terrorists, claiming that elements of the late Sarajevan government were shielding extremists, some of whom had ties to Bin Laden. Bin Laden, according to intelligence reports from the Middle East, funded small groups of recruits from around the world through his Sudanese businesses. One of them was the Algerian man who, according to authorities, forged documents on behalf of a group of people accused of plotting to bomb the U.S. Rez Sam, a former dormitory mate of Bin Laden's, was arrested at the Canadian-American border in December 1999 with a nitroglycerin car full of bomb-making supplies. A French court convicted him of conspiring with Bin Laden. A search of passport and residence records by the Bosnian government at the request of the United States uncovered other former Mujahideen members who had links to the Algerian group or other suspected terrorist groups, and who had lived in the region 100 kilometers, 60 miles, north of the capital Sarajevo in recent years. Khalil al-Deek was detained in late December 1999 in Jordan on suspicion of plotting to blow up tourist resorts. A second Bosnian citizen named Hamid H. lived in Canada with Otmani at the same time and worked for a group linked to Osama bin Laden. The New York Times reported on June 26, 1997 that the two men had confessed to having served in Bosnian Muslim forces, and that they had also admitted to having ties to bin Laden. The government of Bosnia denied this information after the September 11 attacks. The press reported in 1999 that bin Laden had been granted citizenship and a Bosnian passport in 1993 by the Sarajevo government. The new explanation was that bin Laden had not personally collected the Bosnian passport, and that the Vienna embassy, which issued it, did not know who he was at that point. Fedos Klosi of the State Intelligence Service of Albania, SHISH, said that bin Laden was running a terrorist network in Albania for the purpose of taking part in the war in Kosovo under the pretense of being a humanitarian organization. It was reported that the network was established in 1994 and that Claude Cater was a member. In 1998, 4 EIJ members were detained in Albania and were transferred to Egypt. According to some sources, bin Laden's Al-Qaeda had been operating in the Balkans at the time and provided support to Kosovo Liberation Army, PLO. In his trial before the ICTY, former Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic quoted an alleged FBI report. He accused bin Laden of using Albania as a stepping stone for terrorism in the Balkans and elsewhere in the region. He said they told Richard Holbrooke that the KLA was supported by Al-Qaeda, but the U.S. chose to work with KLA and therefore indirectly with Osama, despite the 1998 U.S. embassy bombings earlier in the year. Milosevic said the U.S. supported the terrorists, culminating in NATO bombing Yugoslavia in 1999 during the Kosovo War. September 11 attacks. God knows we didn't mean to blow up the towers, but when the situation became unbearable and we saw the injustice and the tyranny of the U.S.-Israel alliance against us in Palestine and Lebanon, I began to think about it. The events that affected me most were the events of 1982 and then the events that followed, when America let the Israelis invade Lebanon, with the help of the U.S. Sixth Fleet. And as I watched the towers being blown up in Lebanon, I thought about how we should punish the unjust in the same way. We should blow up towers in America so they can have a taste of what we are eating and stop killing our babies and women. Osama bin Laden, 2004. After initially denying responsibility, bin Laden said in a statement after the attacks, "What we are tasting in the United States today is nothing like what we have been tasting for decades. For over 80 years, our Ummah has suffered this humiliation and humiliation. Our sons have been killed, our blood has been spilled, our sacred sites have been attacked, and we are not governed by Allah's command. Yet no one cares." The United States declared war on terror in response, and the CIA's Special Activities Division, SAD, was given the task of locating, killing, or apprehending bin Laden. The FBI has said that classified evidence implicating al-Qaeda and bin Laden in the attacks on September 11 is clear and unambiguous. The UK government came to the same conclusion regarding al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden's responsibility for the attacks, although a government report said the evidence presented was not necessarily sufficient to bring the case to trial. Several countries have tightened anti-terrorism laws to prevent future attacks. Although bin Laden initially denied his involvement in the attacks, on September 16, 2001, he read a statement that was later broadcast on Qatar's Al Jazeera satellite channel in which he denied responsibility for the attacks. In a videotape that U.S. forces recovered from him in Jalalabad in November 2001, bin Laden is seen talking with Khalid al-Harbi about the attack in a way that suggests he knew what was going to happen. The tape was aired on several news networks on December 13, 2001. The accuracy of this translation has been called into question by Arabist Dr. Abdul Abdul Sattar. This is very problematic because at the most important points where it is being used to prove bin Laden's guilt, it is not exactly the same as Arabic. In a 2004 video, without retracting any of his previous statements, bin Laden said he personally directed the 19 hijackers. In an 18-minute tape played on Al Jazeera 4 days before America's presidential election in 2004, bin Laden accused President George W. In 2 other Al Jazeera videos released in 2006, al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden claimed responsibility for the September 11 attacks, saying, "I am the commander of the 19 brothers. I was responsible for ordering the 19 brothers to carry out the attacks on May 23, 2006. In the videos, al-Qaeda's leader was seen with his top lieutenants Ramzi bin al-Shib and 2 of the September 11 hijackers Hamza al-Ghamdi and Wael al-Shari as they prepared for the attacks, videos broadcast on September 7, 2006. The alleged reasons for the attacks include U.S. support of Israel, U.S. military presence in Saudi Arabia, and U.S. sanctions against Iraq. Criminal charges. Libya issued the first formal Interpol arrest warrant for bin Laden and 3 others on March 16, 1998. They were charged with the murder of Sylvan Becker, an agent of Germany's Domestic Intelligence Service, FSA, in the terrorism department, and his wife Vera, on March 10, 1994 in Libya. At the time of bin Laden's death, the Libyan government still held him in custody. On June 8, 1998, a federal grand jury in New York indicted bin Laden on charges of murder of U.S. nationals abroad, conspiracy to murder U.S. nationals abroad, and attacks on a federal facility resulting in death for his alleged involvement in 1998 United States Embassy attacks in Kenya and Tanzania, as well as charges that he was the leader of the terrorist organization known as al-Qaeda and was a major financial supporter of Islamic fighters around the world. The evidence against bin Laden included testimony from former al-Qaeda members in a court of law, as well as satellite phone records from a phone bought for him by an al-Qaeda procurement agent in the U.S. However, the Taliban refused to hand him over on the grounds of lack of evidence in the indictment and the lack of jurisdiction for non-Muslims to try a Muslim. Bin Laden was added to the FBI's list of 10 most wanted fugitives on July 7, 1999. After being charged with capital crimes in connection with the 1998 attacks on the U.S. Embassy. Several assassination attempts and requests for bin Laden's extradition from the Taliban in Afghanistan were unsuccessful before the bombing in Afghanistan in October 2001. In 1999, President Bill Clinton urged the UN to impose sanctions on Afghanistan in an effort to persuade the Taliban to hand him over. On October 10, 2001, bin Laden appeared as well on the initial list of the top 22 FBI most wanted terrorists, which was released to the public by the President of the United States George W. Bush, in direct response to the September 11 attacks, but which was again based on the indictment for the 1998 embassy attack. Bin Laden was among a group of 13 fugitive terrorists wanted on that latter list for questioning about the 1998 embassy bombings. Bin Laden remains the only fugitive ever to be listed on both FBI fugitive lists. Despite the multiple indictments listed above and multiple requests, the Taliban refused to extradite Osama bin Laden. However, they did offer to try him before an Islamic court if evidence of Osama bin Laden's involvement in the September 11 attacks was provided. It was not until 8 days after the bombing of Afghanistan began in October 2001 that the Taliban finally did offer to turn over Osama bin Laden to a third-party country for trial in return for the United States ending the bombing. President Bush rejected the offer, saying it was not negotiable. Bush said, "We don't need to talk about innocence or guilt, because we know he is guilty." On June 15, 2011, federal prosecutors in the United States dropped all charges against al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden after he passed away in May. Pursuit by the United States. Clinton administration. The capture of Osama bin Laden has been a goal of the U.S. government since Bill Clinton's presidency. Shortly after September 11, 2001, it was discovered that President Clinton signed a directive authorizing the Central Intelligence Agency, and specifically, their elite PSI, to capture bin Laden and transport him to the U.S., following the 1998 attacks on U.S. embassies in Africa. If it was deemed impossible to capture bin Laden alive, then lethal force was used. On August 20, 1998, U.S. Navy ships fired 66 cruise missiles into the Arabian Sea at bin Laden's training camp near Khost, Afghanistan. The missiles missed bin Laden by several hours. In 1999, the CIA and Pakistani military intelligence planned to send a team of about 60 Pakistani commandos into Afghanistan with the purpose of capturing or killing bin Laden. However, the plan was foiled by the 1999 Pakistan coup d'état. In 2000, foreign agents working on the CIA's behalf fired a rocket-propelled grenade at a truck carrying bin Laden through the mountains in Afghanistan, striking one of the trucks but not the truck in which he was riding. In 2000, before the September 11 attacks, Paul Bremer characterized the Clinton administration as correctly focused on bin Laden, while Robert Oakley criticized their obsession with Osama. Bush administration. In the wake of the September 11, 2001 attacks, U.S. government officials named bin Laden and al-Qaeda as the primary perpetrators of the attacks and offered a $25 million reward for any information leading to bin Laden's arrest or death. On July 13, 2007, the U.S. Senate voted to twice the $25 million reward, but the amount has never been increased. The American Association of Air Pilots and the American Association of Air Transport Executives offered a $2 million additional reward. It was widely believed that bin Laden was hiding in Spin Gar, a mountain range in eastern Afghanistan, close to the Pakistan border. The U.S. government came to the conclusion that bin Laden started the Battle of Tora Bora, a cave complex along the Afghanistan's eastern border, at the end of 2001. Civilian and military officials who had direct knowledge of the situation said that the failure of the U.S. to commit enough U.S. ground troops to the battle led to bin Laden's escape, and was the worst failure of the United States war against al-Qaeda. Intelligence officials gathered what they believed was conclusive evidence, based on contemporary and subsequent interviews and intercepted communications. According to the Washington Post, the CIA's Special Operations Paramilitary Task Force dedicated to catching bin Laden was decommissioned at the end of 2005. On August 14 and 16, 2007, U.S. and Afghan forces stormed the mountain caves of Tora Bora. The military had been drawn to the caves after learning about a meeting of al-Qaeda members held there prior to the start of the holy month of Ramadan. Despite killing dozens of al-Qaeda and Taliban suspects, they were unable to capture bin Laden or his handler, Ayman al-Zawahiri. Obama administration. In his second presidential debate on foreign policy on October 7, 2008, then-candidate Barack Obama said, "We will take out bin Laden, and we will destroy al-Qaeda, and that must be our top national security priority." On the eve of his election, then-President-elect Obama declared his intention to reinvigorate our commitment to finding bin Laden, according to his national security advisors, as part of an effort to step up efforts to hunt down the terrorist. President Obama repudiated the Bush administration's bin Laden policy, which focused on all terrorist threats from al-Qaeda, Hamas, and Hezbollah, instead of concentrating on bin Laden and his direct affiliates. Robert Gates, U.S. Secretary of Defense, said on December 19, 2009, that officials have had no credible intelligence on bin Laden's location for years. A week later, then U.S. Commander-in-Chief General Stanley McChrystal, now the top U.S. general in Afghanistan, said that Al-Qaeda will not be defeated without the capture or death of bin Laden. Testifying before the U.S. Congress on December 21, 2009, McChrystal noted that bin Laden has become and that Obama's decision to send 30,000 additional troops to Afghanistan meant success was possible. I do not believe that we can truly defeat Al-Qaeda until we capture or kill bin Laden, McChrystal stated. Killing or capturing bin Laden will not end the fight against Al-Qaeda, but we cannot eliminate the movement if bin Laden remains at large. On April 1, 2011, President Obama authorized a secret operation to kill bin Laden or capture him. On May 1, 2011, the White House said that SEAL Team 6 carried out the operation and killed bin Laden in his compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. Activities and whereabouts after the September 11 attacks. In a CNN film clip of September 17, 2001, President George W. Bush said, "I want justice for Osama bin Laden." There was an old poster in the West, if I remember correctly, that said, "Wanted, dead or alive." After that, bin Laden kept his distance from the public to avoid capture. There were many speculative press reports about his whereabouts and even his death. Some put him in different places at different times. None of them was ever proven. After military attacks in Afghanistan failed to find bin Laden, Pakistan was repeatedly identified as his suspected hideout. Here are some of the conflicting reports about bin Laden's whereabouts and misstatements about his death. On December 11, 2005, Atiya Abdullah al-Rahman sent a letter from his home in Abbottabad, Pakistan, to Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden's brother, Osama Ali, according to a translation of the letter from the United States military's Combating Terrorism Center, CTC at West Point. In the letter, Atiya told Osama bin Laden and Osama bin Laden that the brothers of the leadership are in Waziristan. Al-Rahman also suggests that bin Laden and Al-Qaeda are weak, and have many issues of their own, according to a letter that military and counterterrorism officials have verified as authentic. In August 2007, Al-Qaeda continued to post time-sensitive, professionally verified videos that demonstrate bin Laden's continued survival. Bin Laden claimed responsibility for the attacks on September 11, 2001, and specifically denied any knowledge of them from the Taliban or the people of Afghanistan. In 2009, Thomas W. Gillespie, a research associate at the University of Pennsylvania, and Jan A. Agnew, a professor at the University of California, Los Angeles, used satellite-assisted geographical analysis to identify 3 compounds in the Parakiner area as bin Laden's probable hideouts. The New York Daily News, in March 2009, reported that the search for bin Laden had focused on the Kalam Valley in Pakistan's Chitral district. Captured Al-Qaeda leaders have confirmed that bin Laden is holed up in Chitral, the newspaper reported. In December 2009, a former Taliban detainee in Pakistan told the New York Times that he had information that bin Laden was in Afghanistan. According to the detainee, he met a reliable contact who saw bin Laden in Afghanistan around 15 to 20 days ago. On December 6, 2009, U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates said the U.S. had no credible information on bin Laden's whereabouts for years. Pakistan's Prime Minister Gilani denied that bin Laden was in Pakistan. According to BBC News, on December 9, 2009, U.S. Army General Stanley McChrystal said that capturing or killing bin Laden was still very important to the U.S. High Command. On February 2, 2010, an official visit to Afghanistan by Hamid Karzai, the president of Afghanistan, included a discussion on Saudi Arabia's possible role in Karzai's plan to reinstate Taliban militants. An anonymous official of Saudi Foreign Affairs said at the time that the kingdom did not want to get involved in the peace process in Afghanistan, unless the Taliban cut ties with extremists and got rid of bin Laden. On July 7, 2010, the Saudi-language newspaper Al Masirah reported that bin Laden was hiding in the mountain town of Qom in northeastern Iran, a claim that was repeated by the Australian's online edition on June 9. On October 18, 2010, a NATO official said that bin Laden is alive and well and living in Pakistan under the protection of the country's security services. A Pakistani official later denied the report, saying that the allegations were meant to pressure the Pakistani government before talks aimed at improving relations between the two countries. On March 29, 2012, the Pakistani newspaper Dawn obtained a report from Pakistani security officials based on interviews with Bin Laden's 3 surviving wives that details his whereabouts while living in Pakistan. Bin Laden reprimanded followers in a 2010 letter for reinterpreting an Islamic doctrine to justify the killing of unintended non-combatants in unusual circumstances, which had galvanized Muslims against the movement of the groups associated with Al-Qaeda. Bin Laden denounced Tehran for an assault on members of a rival tribe, saying the operation was not justified because non-combatants had been killed. Bin Laden wrote that the Tatarist doctrine needed to be revised in light of the current context and established limits. He asked a subordinate to create a jihadi code of conduct that would limit military operations to prevent civilian deaths. In Yemen, Bin Laden called for a ceasefire that would bring stability to the country, or at the very least demonstrate to the world that he was serious about keeping Muslims safe based on peace. In Somalia, Bin Laden warned of the inevitable poverty caused by constant warfare and urged al-Shabaab to focus on economic development. He urged his followers worldwide to educate and persuade rather than confront Islamic political parties. Whereabouts? Bin Laden was found in Abbottabad, Pakistan, in April 2011. Previously, Bin Laden was believed to be hiding in Abbottabad, Pakistan, close to the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. However, Bin Laden was found 160 kilometers, 100 miles, southwest of Abbottabad in a 3-story mansion. Bin Laden is believed to have been living in Abbottabad from 2001 to 2005. According to Google Earth, Bin Laden's home is located at 34:10:9.51 and 73:14:32.78 E, approximately 1.3 kilometers, 0.80 miles, southwest of Pakistan Military Academy, Abbottabad. Death and aftermath. On May 2, 2011, Osama bin Laden was killed by a U.S. military special operations unit in the Pakistani city of Abbottabad. The operation was ordered by U.S. President Barack Obama and was carried out by a team of U.S. Navy SEALs from Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, with the assistance of CIA operatives. The raid on bin Laden's compound in Abbottabad originated from Afghanistan. According to reports at the time, bin Laden's body was flown to Afghanistan for identification and then buried at sea, according to Islamic tradition, within 24 hours after his death. However, subsequent reports dispute this account, citing, for example, a lack of evidence that an imam was on board the aircraft carrier USS Carl Vinson when the burial took place. The compound was demolished in February 2012 by Pakistani authorities to prevent its use as a neo-Islamic shrine. In 2013, Pakistan approved plans to construct a $30 million amusement park on the compound's land. In a 2019 interview, Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan said that Pakistani intelligence provided the CIA with information that led to the death of bin Laden. It has been widely reported in the press that the fatality was the result of a blow to the head from Navy SEAL Robert J. Bob J. O'Neill, but this has been widely refuted by witnesses who say that O'Neill was likely already dead at the time of the attack, having been wounded by an anonymous member of the SEAL Team 6 known as Red. 2 suppressed shots were fired from about 10 feet away at bin Laden's head as he was leaning out of the bedroom doorway to check on a point man, Matt Bissonnette, according to one of the SEALs. As soon as the SEALs entered, bin Laden began to convulse and was shot multiple times in the chest. Allegations of Pakistan's support and protection of bin Laden. Bin Laden died in a fortified compound of buildings that appeared to have been built for him and had been his residence for 5 years. The compound was less than 2 kilometers from the Pakistan Military Academy, PMCA, and less than 100 kilometers, 62 miles, from Islamabad, Pakistan's capital. The United States and Pakistani governments initially maintained that no Pakistani official, including senior military officials, knew about bin Laden's whereabouts or was involved in the planning of the U.S. raid, Carlotta Gall wrote in 2014 in the New York Times Magazine. In a 2015 article in the London Review of Books, investigative reporter Seymour M. Hersh, citing U.S. sources, reported that Bin Laden was a prisoner of the Inter-Services Intelligence (ISI) at the compound in Abbottabad since 2006, that Pasha knew about the U.S. mission ahead of time, authorized the helicopters bringing the SEALs into Pakistani airspace, and was paid an unknown sum of money by the CIA. It is highly unlikely that Bin Laden would have been killed in a place where he was not known to be in the Pakistani state, Mosharraf wrote in an op-ed. The U.S. ambassador to Pakistan, Robert Ford, vowed a full investigation into how the country's intelligence services failed to locate Bin Laden in such a heavily fortified compound near Islamabad. It is clear that Bin Laden had a network, Ford said. The question is whether that network was within the government, the state, or within Pakistan society. Some said Bin Laden had a local family living in the compound, and that he never used the internet or a cell phone, making it much easier to find him. Pakistan's president rejected allegations that his country's security forces harbored Bin Laden, calling any allegations of support from the Pakistani government baseless. Government officials said limited resources were being used to fight the Pakistan Taliban and other insurgents that posed a threat to the country, not to find or shelter Bin Laden. According to Kahl, as of 2019, there is no definitive proof that Pakistan knew Bin Laden was in Abbottabad. The documents collected from the compound generally indicate that Bin Laden was cautious about engaging with Pakistani intelligence and law enforcement, particularly in light of Pakistan's involvement in the arrest of al-Qaeda leader Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Reception and legacy. Bin Laden's supporters refer to him by various nicknames, such as the Thamir, the Sheikh, the Jihadist Sheikh or Sheikh al-Mujahid, Hajj, the Director, Lion, and Lion Sheikh. Bin Laden's popularity was at its peak during the war in the Middle East, when opinion polls showed him with a 50% to 60% approval rating. Anti-American protesters from Pakistan to the Palestinian territories used his portraits during protests, speeches, and public campaigns, despite U.S. allied governments' condemnations from the Arab world. Bin Laden led al-Qaeda in the attacks on the United States on September 11, 2001, as well as other large-scale attacks on U.S. and coalition allies around the world. After Bin Laden was killed, President Barack Obama closed his first book of memoirs with a mention of him. At a June 2020 session of Pakistan's National Assembly, Prime Minister Khan condemned the killing of Bin Laden, calling it a humiliating moment in Pakistan's history, and called Bin Laden a shaheed, martyr. He also lambasted past Pakistani governments for their cooperation with the U.S. during the War on Terror, saying that such policies had led to Pakistan's humiliation. Letter to the American people. In November of 2023, in the midst of the 2023 war between Hamas and Israel, Bin Laden's Letter to the Americans, published in 2002, came under fire after TikTok users voiced their support for Bin Laden in the letter about the Israel and Palestine conflict. A collection of these videos went viral on Twitter and led to the removal of the letter from The Guardian's website after over 20 years of online presence on the news outlet's website and TikTok's removal of videos sharing the letter. Thank you for taking the time to engage with our content. We're delighted you enjoyed this article and would love to hear your feedback. Your feedback is really valuable to us, so please share it in the comments box below. If you're new and want to remain up to date on our latest material, subscribe to the Up First Time channel. By subscribing, you will be the first to learn about our new stories and videos, ensuring that you never miss out on any of the excitement. But we're more than just distributing material, we're also about creating a community. That is why we value your feedback so highly. If you have any recommendations or themes you'd like us to look into more, please leave them in the comments. We're always looking for new ideas and eager to hear from our viewers. And, speaking of ideas, if you're as enthusiastic about this subject or person as we are, have you considered doing a whole documentary? Your unique thoughts and viewpoints could be extremely beneficial to others, and presenting them in a documentary style could help you reach an even larger audience. This is something to think about. Finally, remember to click the like button and share this video with your friends and family. Let's work together to expand our community and welcome new members to the Up First Time family. Your support is invaluable to us, and we could not do it without you. Thank you again for your support, and we look forward to continuing this great journey with you.